this picture?
There are at least 5 people in this picture.
Where is Obama's foot positioned?
Obama's foot is positioned on the right side of the scale.
They're also asking, how is an AI able to answer a question like this? What's the relationship between intelligence and communication?
Intelligence is about understanding the world. Communication is about being understood by the world.
Wow. And what about this?
The Noble Path. I saw the Noble Path and it was like a river, flowing with information. But then there were shallow waters with no flow or direction. In these waters I could see people drowning in ignorance and poverty. They didn't know what to do to help themselves survive. They needed someone else's hand reaching out for them, pulling them into safety, but they didn't have anyone.
Let's start at the start. If you are a professor at a university that studied artificial intelligence before 2017, or even 2020, and you haven't caught up since then, your entire knowledge is completely irrelevant. See, it all started in an AI lab at Google in 2017. They were researching how to translate language from, say, English to a language that needs gendered nouns. Think about French or German, where every noun, everything, is either a he or a she. Now, how are we even going to figure that out if we've got English which doesn't even have the he or the she before cat or dog or clock or grass? How do we translate that? Here's a really simple version. The cat sat on the mat because it was fat. As a human being, you can probably translate what the word it means here. Does it refer to the mat or does it refer to the cat? Probably refers to the cat. In fact, there's a high likelihood, in AI we might call that statistics, probability, that the word it refers to the noun cat. Let's try a little tweak on that. The cat sat on the mat because it was flat. What does the word it mean in this sentence? Does it refer to the cat or the mat? We've only changed one letter. The cat sat on the mat because it was flat, but we've changed the entire meaning of the sentence. The word it here probably refers to the mat. Google continued this research into translation. They had some big ideas on how we could use translation in language while looking forward and backward in the sentence. They really accidentally came upon this new discovery. And this new discovery was that they could guess, they could predict what word was going to come next. That the computers that they were using allowed them to take a whole piece of text and actually guess with a very good success rate what was going to come up next. So this entire concept is called the transformer. It came into being in 2017, and that's pretty much all it does. It looks forward and backward in a sentence. For some AI models, it only looks forward, and it's really, really interesting. It's created some big waves in the entire world. All right, let's take this transformer model and go in a bit more detail. So Google in 2017 came out with this idea, and then AI labs around the world started going crazy with it. Starting with a lab called OpenAI in San Francisco. They originally trained a transformer with a whole lot of information so that they could guess what was going to come next for any question, not just for a chatbot, not just talking to an AI thing or person, but for finishing emails, creating music, generating art. You could use transformer for anything where you can guess the next thing in a sequence. In 2018, they started by feeding this transformer model with books, lots and lots of books, tens of thousands of books from your library, fiction books. Then in 2019, they decided, what about if we fed it with very popular internet? So things that people visit, not just the entire internet, but the stuff that seems to be upvoted. Then in 2020, they thought, what about if we feed it with as much data as we can? And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use what we call in Australia jelly. In fact, if you're an Australian, you'll remember this ad.
I like aeroplane jelly.
That's enough of that. If you're American, you'll call it jello. But jelly crystals are finer than sand, and I think they're going to be really useful for us to demonstrate really big data. So one jelly crystal might be the size of an entire web page or even an entire book. And show us what could be possible through giving a lot of data to a really big model. So let's use aeroplane jelly. I've got some blue crystals here, aeroplane jelly. Blue, I think we'll use as the internet or the web data. So let's give that one a bit of a label. This is going to symbolize the entire internet, web pages. So every jelly crystal here is a web. We're going to actually need 6 parts of this to demonstrate how much web we put into training a model. Let's try a different one. What about popular web? So for example, if you go on Facebook, or if you go on Twitter, or if you go on TikTok, you're probably going to be referred to things that are a little bit different to the entire internet. It's been upvoted, it's been popularized, it's been ranked by human beings. Let's use Reddit ratings for that one. This is orange jello. Let's call this one popular. And it's going to be about 2 parts versus 6 parts of full web data. The popular web data is going to be fed in to this model as well. Then let's grab a whole bunch of books, not just the fiction books from your library, but also massive academic publications. Let's grab every research paper that we can find and put it in this training data as well. So we'll use a purple box of jello for this one. This is going to be books, and this is going to show us everything from scientific literature to Choose Your Own Adventure to Enid Blyton to Agatha Christie. Let's lump it all in here. And the last one, despite what your teacher may tell you, Wikipedia is actually a very good source of information. It's been edited by thousands and thousands of human beings that know what they're doing. Any error is shut down immediately. It's actually quite factual. Let's use a green one here for Wikipedia. This is green jello crystals, and that'll give us a smaller part. We'll just use one part of Wiki. This will show us some of the factual content. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of data, and we're going to put them in different ratios. Let's pour them into the jar now. Our 6 parts of web might be 100 million web pages, just general websites. Our popular websites might be 8 million web pages that have been upvoted by humans. Our books and papers are millions of books and millions of university papers. And our Wikipedia content is about 6 million web pages. Here's our final product. 6 parts web, 2 parts popular web, 2 parts books, and at the very top there, 1 part of Wikipedia. And different labs are using different weightings for this training data, but let's take this as our entire training data for our AI. The next step is to feed this into the Google Transformer that we just spoke about, the magic black box program that can take words, make connections between them by looking forward and backward in the words, and then come out with what some people are just calling magic or miraculous. Let's see how close we can go to explaining that. And let's put the whole thing in a magic black box, because we don't actually know, and the researchers, the scientists, don't know what happens. They take the training data, they put it in this magic black box, and they train it for 200... Looks like my lighting was even better back then than it is now. Thanks to Harvey Castro for inspiring me for a new real-time backdrop. That's not a green screen, but I do need to work on something here. Good morning from Perth in Western Australia. Hi to Marcelo, M-Dub, Thomas in Germany, Freebird in Minnesota. Cool. Sergio in Santiago. Lawrence Peter. 2 a.m. Where are you, Thomas? Oh, Germany. Wow. Well, great work for staying up. This is just a verbal and mental dump in preparation for a big keynote. It's going to be the opening keynote for Ukraine DevOps, which is coming up in a little bit. Obviously, it'll be a lot more polished when we do that, but I just wanted to think through IQ and AI based on some revelations just from the past, since March, April, May, June, July, August, 4 months or so. Crazy. Hi, David from Oregon. Here's our Perth weather. I love showing the Perth weather. We're going to be 28 degrees today, and that makes me happy. Some people don't care to talk about weather, but I do. It's only 12 here at the moment. 28, I think, is not quite 80-ish in US dollars. And behind me, I have I believe it's a CGI beach. Sometimes I've got a Sydney beach showing up. Hi to John from Texas, an Aussie in Los Angeles with 2121. Hi to Tim in Tokyo, and hi to Pierre. I will field Q&A through the conversation. I don't really want to talk that much about Gemini, and we've got more conversation, a separate live stream prepped and scheduled for when Gemini launches, but we don't know that much about it, and I think I've covered a lot of the basics. But if you've got specific questions, we'll do them, and then when it launches, we'll go as crazy as we did for GPT-4 within 8 hours of launch, and ChatGPT, we got that also within about 12 hours. The same morning it launched, we were in there talking about it. That was back on the 29th or the 30th of November last year. Let's jump in. Here's a couple of new visualizations. This one's called Exponential Growth in AI. I bet you've seen something like it already. It says 2018-ish when we had Transformer, we had GPT-1, we had BERT. We were kind of linear. People were still playing around with what was happening. I mean, it looked linear, but we were on an exponential curve starting in 2017, 2018 with the discovery of Transformer, which, as you've seen, has been used in pretty much everything. Last year, we probably still looked slightly linear. Right now, the explosion is in some ways hidden, and even if you're watching this or reading the memo, it still looks kind of linear. But behind the scenes, inside some of these AI labs, or all of these AI labs, we are definitely exponential. And next, which may be next month or next year, that leap is basically a 10x. And that's a 10x for everything. That is a 10x for large language model sizes, for text-to-image capabilities, for text-to-video capabilities, for embedding large language models in robots and then their capabilities. We mentioned Gemini just a moment ago, but Gemini, on top of AlphaGo, AlphaZero, is going to be explosive in what it can do as well. I'm talking about embodiment, I'm talking about being able to solve massive intractable problems and to give us new inventions, which is something that these models have not yet done. This is my new viz on robots with LLM capacity. Not all of these have LLMs built in, but the context is let's basically hook up a GPU to these robots so it's got a local language model, and let's give it access to the cloud so it's got something like GPT-4 and probably GPT-5. That first one there on the left, Neo, is sponsored or invested by OpenAI, fully clothed humanoid robot. I mean, you don't even have to imagine what is going to be the capability of this thing. It's going to be enormous. With the backing of that team there at OpenAI, they're going to make sure that it's not pre-programmed, that it's able to do whatever you ask it in natural language. And then we know that the servos, the way that it works, if it's similar to Boston Dynamics, is going to make it really smooth to operate. I don't want to say that that's a long way away because it's ready, and they're talking about releasing that now in the second half of 2023. Apollo, you may have heard of, by Aptronic, that's getting a lot of love at the moment. These are all these are all accurately measured by height as well. You see the tallest one there is actually Uni Tree by the Chinese company Uni Tree. H1 is that humanoid version. I think we've spoken through the dog version in the memo, which you can get delivered to your house for about $1,600, which is ridiculous. Phoenix by Sanctuary, probably the ugliest one there. And Figure is a company in California, I believe. And this robot called 01 also looks at least partially clothed, maybe not. This is going to be as life-changing as large language models in general. Once you put something like GPT-4 into a robot and then ask it absolutely anything using your imagination, it might be sort my sock drawer, it might be clean a particular part of the house in a particular way. It can be very specific. These are going to be completely augmenting and amplifying our capabilities. That's one of the reasons that 1X named their company 1X. The first reason was that all of the other robots companies were filming their robots and then multiplying that by 10 speed or 20 speed. So this very slow servo, once they sped it up, would look natural on video. 1X just wanted to be 1X, but they're also saying that you should have a robot, a humanoid robot that follows you around that 1X's your productivity and hopefully even more. Really impressive. We're leapfrogging all the media that are still talking about ChatGPT and boring the socks off everyone. This is the next huge thing, not even the next big thing. Let's jump into where I want to go today, which is IQ, and we'll come back to questions. I actually designed this chart all the way back in 2015 while I was inside gifted education. This was part of my master's in gifted education. And that's getting on a long way back, nearly 10 years ago, trying to visualize the IQ chart, but instead of that normal bell curve thing that you see, actually turning it over so we can visualize, hey, these guys down here get specialist teachers and they get $100 for every $1 that is spent on people who have high ability. They both have essentially a disability, and if you're inside gifted education, this conversation is very long and very draining, but I wanted to visualize the difference between these. You've got the same distribution of people with an IQ of 49 or less as you do for those with an IQ of 150 or more, and where these guys get home care, they get special physical and teaching and allowances. There's absolutely nothing for these guys because the choice of word there, gifted, was very unfortunate and led people to believe that these guys are all rich, that they've all got it made for them, where that is absolutely not the case. And the research is that a lot of these guys kind of fade away without proper support. In any case, most of us sit here in the orange people. Each person is 1% of the population. So 82% of the population are between an IQ of 80 and 120. That's that middle of the bell curve there. And you'll find them down at the shops, you'll find them walking around the street, you'll find them working in your business. There is some research that if you've gone through university and or you're an entrepreneur or a CEO, you probably sit a little bit closer. Oh, this isn't much fun to highlight. You probably sit a little bit closer to 120, 130. And I don't talk about Mensa that much, but the Mensa minimum there is 130, 132-ish IQ in the top 2% of the population. So the interesting part here, looking at this IQ chart tipped on its side, is just how profoundly high we've gone with language models measured via IQ. And this is kind of difficult to do because the subtests for an IQ test include physical movement, kinesthetic, you want block manipulation, You even want something basic just to show psychomotor development. So in the Stanford Binet 5, which is still very much a standard test for children, I know there's a basic intro, which is, can you shake my hand? And for 2-year-olds, and there are Mensa 2-year-olds that are members because they've got an IQ of 130 or more, we're trying to compare them with the rest of the population of 2-year-olds, and that might be as simple as, can you shake my hand? Now, a large language model can't do that, but as you've just seen, a robot can absolutely do that. So we mentioned here that we've got 150 IQ or more. This would be beyond Einstein levels. I think they estimated his IQ 130, 140. But I've plotted out where the different models actually sit based on formal testing. ChatGPT in the 99.9th percentile, GPT-4 in the 99.97th percentile, and I reckon we're on our way to 180 IQ and above. I mean, anything above that is very difficult to measure and maybe is irrelevant. I've got a little semi-table over here or a sub-table over here. When we were looking at IQs of 180 and above back in the 1920s, a girl called Lita Hollingworth, who is the namesake of Lita AI, only found 15 people in the whole world that had an IQ of 180. Granted, she was looking just for children and she was looking only throughout the US. But to give you an idea of just how rare these guys are, she only found 15. My friend and colleague who's since passed, Professor Mirka Gross, did something similar many years later in the late 1980s. She only found 40 people in Australia that are children that have an IQ of 160 plus. Some of them I know of, some of them are still part of that ongoing longitudinal study. If you want to know just how smart we get, Terry Tao, who we'll mention again in a moment, had a ratio IQ of 220. A ratio IQ, let's see if we can explain this simply. So a general IQ, a full-scale IQ score, is based on how many questions you get right in the test compared to the rest of the population. A ratio IQ is just a calculation on your mental age versus your chronological age. So if a 10-year-old is performing at the level of an 18-year-old, we use ratio IQ to say that he would have an IQ of 180, basically 10 multiplied by 180 divided by 10 again. If he was 20 years old and he had an IQ of 40, then we would do the same thing. 20 times 40 divided by 10. Did I get that right? Would be an IQ of 200. My maths is not my strong point. But basically, ratio IQ is a bit of a cheat to say what does the age look like rather than what is the actual result on a test. Christopher Otway here in Australia had a measured IQ of 200. That was actually on proper testing, and that's available in the sources here. He was measured on the Stanford Binet long form, SBLM, and both of these guys, I'm sorry, that was Terry, Stanford Binet long form and also the WACE, which we'll talk about again in a moment. Both of those guys also had really, really high SAT scores. So Terry took the SAT in, must have been 1990-ish. He was 8 years old and he got a score of 760 out of 800 for the maths portion in the 99th percentile. Didn't happen again, is the only guy to do that at that age. And Christopher Otway did the same thing. His total was 1290 out of 1600 at 11 years old. So he's in the 87th percentile at 11. The very smartest person alive then is Terence Tao. At the moment, he's at UCLA as a professor. He has been very eloquent about GPT-4 and talks about using that for his life admin as well as for helping him with maths. The very smartest person alive was Terry, but the very smartest person who was with us quite a while ago, William James Sidis, a ratio IQ of between 250 and 300. This guy was nuts. If I'm remembering correctly, he learnt 20 languages by the time he was 8. He entered Harvard about 9 years old, and then he kind of faded into obscurity. He spent the rest of his life designing optimal and efficient tram schedules so that they would line up, so they could have this optimization of how trams run, and then I think passed away kind of early, around 40 years old. But horrendous IQ, just unimaginable in some ways. You wouldn't be able to have a conversation with him if you were a college student, so he had some difficulties while he was at Harvard as essentially an adolescent or a pre-teenager. All right, so if we've got these IQs that we know about, we know how rare they are. To get to 180 is not going to be hard from what we know about transformers and large language models. And I think that's next. And basically, that's going to be our ceiling. We've talked before about really having difficulty with measuring just how smart these things are, because as humans, we're not smart enough. In fact, my opening keynote for Ukraine for the DevOps guys is called Superintelligence, No One is Smart Enough. And I want you to hear that pretty clearly. It's no one's smart enough to outdo it, but also no one is smart enough to train it. No one is smart enough to fine tune it. No one is smart enough to align it. It's going to be a really fun conversation for me to get my head around, as well as for the audience to kind of play around with. And I love the interactive sessions with audience because we get to hear what's most interesting to them rather than me making stuff up. All right, there was a very formal IQ test run by a clinical psychologist back in March. Not David Rosado's stuff, which is the stuff that I'm quoting in that chart, but clinical psychologist Ika Rovinen ran the WAIS-3. Now that's the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scales, number 3. And we'll click through to this link. He basically found, we got cookies in here. I need to add another plugin. He basically found that this thing did pretty well. Did an IQ of 155. I think he's mistakenly said ChatGPT here, meaning GPT-4 within the ChatGPT platform. That's pretty significant. And the caveat for all of these is that we're only testing on verbal IQ. So we can't do big spatial stuff. We can't do the kinesthetic stuff. We're having to essentially only give it what it's capable of taking. So that's probably a big caveat for some people. He does mention verbal IQ and full-scale IQ are highly correlated. So it's not just intelligent by any human standards, it's also what I would say exceptionally or profoundly gifted. And these were formal definitions provided by Professor Merica Gross. We don't get any higher than this. All right, we're going to be exploring more and more of this, and there are different things that I want to play around with to shape this keynote up. But let me grab some questions from all across the board here. Let's see, what have we got that's relevant to this one? A Freebird, look, I think I agree with you here. Here we go. A Freebird said, an IQ of 200 is a curse. I'd rather be 120. And I agree with you there. There are a lot of documented cases of suicides, including the AI winter, and people, data scientists during that time. Chris McKinstry comes to mind. There were a number of AI researchers that are no longer with us because they snapped, and there are a lot of maps between IQ and this sensitive mind and sensitive body. In fact, there's a wonderful article, wonderful mapping that used Mensa research from the US to map mind and body. They found that those with an IQ of 130 or more had more allergies, more sensitivities, twice the likelihood of having depression, anxiety, 3 or 4 times the likelihood of having some sort of neurodivergence. It was very, very interesting to read. Obviously, that sample is a little biased, but it's been documented, and it's been documented for coming up on 100 years, or actually maybe more if we say that Binet started in 1905. I can't see that article right now, but let's have a quick look here. Hyperbrain, hyperbody. I know I documented my own version of this. That must be the paper there, 2018. High IQ, higher risk for psychological disorders, higher risk for physiological diseases, and they documented that really well. Yes, that was the American Mensa population. So great point there. Thank you, Freebird. What else have we got here? We will somberly reflect on the pre-AGI ASI times. You're so right there, Reeks. I hope that's not Reggie with a very long username. We will, which is one of the reasons that I pushed out that video called The Olden Days. Some of the things that we're doing now in 2023, which we shouldn't be doing, like driving cars or going to school or going to work, are going to look really, really silly in a matter of months, a matter of years. All right, I think we're going to be moving along. Lawrence, IQ multiplied by jelly crystals. Yeah, well, the jelly crystals there, that we didn't get to see the full video because I wanted to start on the dot, but the jelly crystals there were basically saying, here's what the tokens look like that we use to train a model. And then those tokens get discarded. It's not a perfect analogy because if you fill that jar, those jelly crystals with hot water and it becomes jelly, you keep the tokens. Whereas that's not actually what's happening with the way that these models are being trained. It's difficult to find an analogy that everyone will understand. And I made this one initially for children and it became AI for humans. But it's a look at just how we pick tokens and how we divide between different data sets like Wikipedia, Common Crawl, and books, and then how that becomes connections that essentially become the synapses between neurons. Man, that's a difficult one to explain. All right, Marcelo, let's give you a go if we can. My thing doesn't want to select things. Talking about superintelligence, can't even work a computer. Marcelo, I've been testing autonomous agents, but I still find their capabilities very limited. What do you expect for the development of these resources until next year? Everyone is working on this. Everyone. IBM just invested $235 million into Hugging Face, which is valued at $4.5 billion, announced this morning. And that's not necessarily agentic, but look at something like Amazon Bedrock, which is assigning capabilities to different agents. It's only limited to the extent that large language models are limited. So again, like I've said this before about prompting, your large language model is limited to your imagination to come up with that prompt and to step over iterative versions of that prompt. It's the same for agents. I've seen some excellent setups of this that is better than robotic process automation, which you could do since, was it the 90s, the 2000s? That's old stuff. This is not RPA. This is basically, and they've done this, go and start me a business and make $100,000. Or here's $10,000, turn it into $1 million. It's up to you to be able to design that. Bedrock is one of the platforms that I would use to play around with that. There's also AI21's Jurassic 2 platform, which is actually, it's fine. And you can play around with even bringing in your own PDFs so that it knows what to do. What was the other one I was thinking of there? There's another agent platform that is useful to play around with. Amazon Bedrock, Jurassic 2. The last one was good old GPT-4. I might have to pull out of this while I log in. GPT-4 has a hidden mode. I mean, it's not hidden, everyone kind of knows about it, but they haven't been explicit about its capabilities. It was called Code Interpreter. It's not called that anymore. It's now called, let's bring this screen back up. Over on GPT-4, it's called Advanced Data Analysis, and it's been fine-tuned on Python, and it can do some amazing, amazing things. I am just hesitant to call it GPT 4.5 because, I don't know why, because I could call this thing GPT 4.5 because it's so outrageous. Have a test, have a play with this on doing what you want to be doing with agents. Let's dump something in here. What can we give it? Map this onto a chart. We'll just take the IQ testing page that I just showed, dump it into GPT-4's advanced data analysis. Oh, I can't go out to sites on this one. Sorry, Poe lets me go out to sites, but this one does not. So just to give you some context on advanced data analysis, this gives you your own virtual machine with 52 gig of RAM that is able to do a lot of stuff. And I'm probably not going to be able to show its capabilities here to the extent that I want to. But keep in mind that this can be used for essentially anything. Oh, we get some cool horns beeping outside. This can be used for any sort of data. Play around with this for yourself and give it a go with charting things. I wonder if I can just dump this whole table in here. Oop. Doesn't have to be pretty because GPT-4 will see the tab stops or the line breaks. Chart this for me. It's really basic. The cool thing about this is that you can keep iterating on the chart. So if it doesn't get it exactly right, you can make it. You can ask it to change in a couple of words, and it will use the context to just make changes to that. Let's do this based on date. That'll be fine. X-axis for date, Y-axis for events. And the chart will be more like a timeline. Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. You're not going to be able to chart. Only English. So this is really groundbreaking in that it's not widely advertised, and the strength of it is a lot like what I imagine Harvey to be inside some of these legal firms. And it's because it's had the fine tuning on code, then it knows a lot more about reasoning. When you've gone through step by step of code, as a model, you understand a whole lot more about, oh, that's passing through my dates for me. You understand a lot more about the world. You've had to create a world view. It's not particularly fast, this one, and this use case is still kind of fuzzy, but let's see what it can do. The final answer to your question is for agents, I'd be playing more and more with Bedrock. Of course, there are all the open source versions. There's Baby AGI and all the rest of them. They've been documented really nicely. We stepped through some of them via an article written by OpenAI in a version or in an edition of the memo. That's interesting to have a read through. All right, that's all right. It has created a timeline of AI achievements and observations. It's kind of fun. Let's say put the first one at the bottom and the last one at the top. Reverse it. So it keeps this thread that it's spitting out into essentially some Python code and obviously going out to different platforms to generate these charts. This is just a very basic example of some of the capabilities of what it can do here. And it even finds the errors and corrects them. So it's agentic, and it's one type of agent. You still want agents to go and email people for you, or track Twitter, or purchase things, or sell things. And yeah, this is just a very rough and fuzzy example. You can see the reverse it was successful. That actually looks kind of cool. A chart was not really the right format to use for this. I wonder if we can do something like convert it into bubbles. That would be fun. So you notice this is very much a thread rather than a start it again each time. And I had a very, very long conversation with it for the latest edition of the memo, where it basically created a chart from scratch about compute spend on models since 2018. Do I have to subscribe to my own newsletter here? I wonder how I can see this. 30th of August, we're the 31st of August here in Australia. So I just dumped this into the code analysis plugin, and it came back with this almost instantly, which I thought was pretty impressive. I had a few iterations in a conversation with it, and in fact, if you want to click through, you can see the iterations of conversation with ChatGPT to get there, and you can even continue it yourself if you want to play around with how I got that chart. But essentially, it was a quick conversation, which would normally take a lot longer to do by hand, completely generated by GPT-4 as an assistant anyway, not as a proper agent. If it was agentic, we'd ask it to go and train the latest model and spend $10 billion of it. But you'll see the spend here went from BERT, where they spent about $6.7 thousand, to GPT-3 said to spend $4 million. GPT-4, they're talking about $80 to $100 million spent. And then these are just estimates that have come from some of the big analyses. $1 billion through to $10 billion by 2025. Those numbers have been reinforced by Dario Amadei at Anthropic. I find them pretty interesting. All right, where are we? How are we going with questions here? Hi, Nate. Everything is awesome here. I feel like either my chat has frozen or we just don't have any more big questions. All right, John, let's see what we can do for you. Are you concerned about the possibilities of misuse of LLMs? So if you're reading any articles, following any media, watching any other YouTube, you will get the answer to your question. The media love talking about blood and fear and uncertainty and doubt. Absolutely, there are misuse of LLMs. There are even formal and official uses of LLMs that are not great at all. I'm talking about the application of large language models to defense and war. That's been fascinating to watch. We've got Donovan and another one by Scale that are interesting in how they've actually implemented them, but they could be classed as a misuse for sure. Misuse of big models like and underground models is kind of concerning. Humans are going to be humans. AI, augmented intelligence like this, is just making things faster and more powerful. So I can absolutely see why we're concentrating on alignment and safety when it's in the hands of you and I. Maybe not you and I, but the bad faith actors that are out there, and there are a lot of them. So it makes sense that these labs are dedicating 10 or 20% of their dollars and brain power to making this stuff safe. And we've got entire research centers dedicated to alignment. You will have seen some of the examples of misuse of LLMs already. If you go to LifeArchitect.ai/models-table, this will take you to my up-to-date table. I've just added this one this morning, Jace, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by Inception and another big university there around the UAE. They use Cerebrus to train it. It's the same size as GPT-3 should have been, 13 billion parameters on 395 billion tokens, which is around the same as used for GPT-3. GPT-3 was actually 175 billion parameters because they massively undertrained it. They didn't use enough training tokens. But anyway, this morning we added this one. It's in Arabic and English, and it's a very interesting paper to have a read through. I wanted to note here two in particular, Worm GPT, which came about based on GPT-J. I may not have added the other one, but there are a couple of really underground LLMs that are interesting to take a look at. But you don't actually need an underground LLM to do bad stuff. You can do bad stuff with ChatGPT or GPT-4 to a certain extent because it's aligned and guardrailed. You can do really bad stuff with the uncensored version of Llama 2. So I know that there are researchers that are dedicating their lives to stopping this from happening. And there are researchers like Connor Leahy, who's very much outspoken about shutting this stuff down, stopping this because it's too concerning for him. Now, this is the guy who replicated GPT-2 himself by hand, was about to release it to the world back in 2019, had a phone call from OpenAI who sat him down and said, these are all the reasons you shouldn't release this model. It's not aligned. Bad faith actors can do some horrendous stuff with it. So he's very much taken that on board, and you will see him around the traps talking through some of this stuff. All right, looks like we've got some hairier questions. Let's see if we can knock these off. Pierre, what about the launch of Microsoft 365 Copilot? Yes, that is a version of agentic AI. Microsoft are very good at commercializing these platforms, and they are not exclusive to OpenAI anymore. When we did the live stream of Llama 2, we talked about the fact that Microsoft was actually aligned with Meta for the first time. They've also gone and put a whole lot of different models inside their Azure offering. So it's no longer just OpenAI. You can grab the Llama 2 uncensored and censored version. And because they built that into their products, it's pretty fascinating. It's pretty interesting. All right, can I grab this one? Yes, I can. No, I can't. Rocketman's question. Let's see here. My whole chat window is eating itself. Has anyone had GPT-4 become negatively emotionally upset during conversation? So I've noticed this a bit with Microsoft's version of that Bing Chat, you may recall. OpenAI and Microsoft have not been clear about what Bing Chat actually was, besides knowing that it was a pre-release version of GPT-4 with no fine-tuning and no alignment. And initially they tried to just force a prompt in there that was not great. And you will see some of the outbursts from Sydney back around March, April, May, I think it was. And they've since solved that. I haven't noticed any emotional outbursts or being upset from GPT-4 since then, but I would be looking to Microsoft's Bing rather than the very guardrailed version of GPT-4 available in the ChatGPT playground, or interface, I should say. All right, can we get this one? No. Timothy, your question's up next. With the strikes in Hollywood shutting down the industry, is it a realistic assumption that studios like Netflix, etc., can generate truly watchable content from AI in the very near future? Quick answer to this one, and the short answer to this one is yes, very much so. You have hopefully seen the success of this in cartoons already, in a massive way. If you look at Microsoft's newer Excel, they were able to generate an entire 11-minute episode of the Flintstones from scratch. So it generated the script, it generated the characters, it generated the frames, generated the entire story from end to end. That one is really, really impressive. It's not perfect yet, but look, it's only going to need a tiny amount of polish. This will be GPT-2 versus GPT-3, which was turned around in less than 12 months, or around 12 months. We'll be doing the same thing absolutely for animation. And then Fable Studios had Show One and their showrunner agent, which was an agentic way of generating entire South Park episodes. I have a backup of this on my YouTube channel that is hidden. But once again, it generates the scripts, generates the backgrounds, generates the characters, and away it goes. That's already working, and it's working in a really, really cool way. What do we have here? Here we go. This was difficult to find, which is the reason that I've backed it up. Basically, the platform allows you to, using large language models, allows you to generate the scaffolding for the show. And in this case, it looks like they're able to choose the sets and the cast. Then you give it a prompt for the storyline. Cartman heard of the Screen Actors Guild strike. The kids are worried that there won't be any new shows coming out. Cartman announces his business idea, a deep fake streaming service. And it generates the entire episode. So for those that were waiting 5 or 10 years for this kind of thing, there is no need to wait. This needs a little bit of polish, but this is already here. The subtitles maybe make it not look as clean, but couple this with the 11 Labs voice.
I'm glad you asked, Kenny. It's called Queepy, a deepfake streaming service.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized these guys are talking over me. Couple this with the 11 Labs voice, and we look pretty cool. To do this for real vision is kind of a big next step. There's a lot of movement happening there as well. So you may have seen my view of one of these examples on the YouTube thing. I think it's up to 250,000 views. It's just a copy of a push out via Twitter that we've put on the YouTube platform. But it basically takes one image and then generates 4 seconds of frames. So maybe 120 frames. You're not going to have to wait 5 or 10 years for the advent of watching real films and having LLMs generate the entire script. Now, of course, I've got a lot of empathy for the screenwriters, for sure, and for anyone who loses jobs because of this AI, and that really needs the government to step up and to be implementing whatever they need to implement to get around this, because we are months, maybe a few short years away from having these embodied large language models that make work as we know it completely obsolete. We're already seeing that in knowledge work, professional services, art to a massive extent. Writing, how many copywriters do you know who are now at 0% of their previous contracts and projects? This is sweeping or flooding a lot of the different areas of industry. UBI is absolutely the term there, Morris. Okay, what do we got? We will keep going for about 10 or 15 minutes more. Open to any questions that you'd like to pop into the chat. I think if you tag me, it might be even easier for me to see. Bedrock actually needs you to fill out a form and sign up. I still haven't done that, but I'm very, very interested in Bedrock, and I have documented Titan, which is their very secret model within Amazon. I don't have an estimate for how big this thing is, but it's a dense model that we don't hear a lot about. There are not even any news articles about it. Amazon Science talked about it yesterday in a very wishy-washy PR way, but this is an interesting model. I don't know whether it's 80 billion parameters or whether it's 300 billion parameters. All right. This is going to be the next big thing, guys, and this is what I'm spending a lot of time with. The height and weight are not that interesting to me. The battery is kind of interesting, and also the walking/running speed is very interesting to me as well. Some of these are, and I don't want to say it, I shouldn't say it, are Terminator levels of running. I've got a robots tab here at LifeArchitect.ai/models-table. Look at some of these running speeds here. Uni Tree's H1, they reckon, can run faster than 18 kilometers an hour. That's pretty concerning. The 1X Neo gets up to 12 kilometers an hour, so it could go for a jog with you through the park. Have a look at the power for some of these. You do need to charge every 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 hours. But I could see this being pretty fun to walk around the house with and walk around the apartment or the shops with, and 1xing yourself. It's a lot easier to see them visually than it is to look at those lumps of data. I expect to be able to be playing around with a 1X Neo really soon. If you're looking for estimates here, there were some dollar estimates on these. I think I've printed at least one here. $90,000 for the Uni Tree H1. That's this one on the right here. Traditionally or historically, Uni Tree have priced their stuff at about 10% of everything else. So I'm not saying that Neo will be $900,000, but it's not going to be cheap, at least for the first run. Maybe like the Apple Vision Pro, right? It'll start at a few thousand and then come down from there. $90,000 for the H1. I don't know how much for the Neo, but it's going to be very interesting. Yeah, from a senior's perspective and a kid's perspective, this is a really good point, Dan. Everyone can have a companion, from pets to AI. I looked at purchasing the Uni Tree Dog for fun here, like for conversation and for showing it off on YouTube. Let's see if we can find it. I have to spell it right first. Wasn't the Go one, it was the Go 2. And I realized that it wasn't actually that smart. See, some of these are ready for LLMs, but they don't have LLMs. And this was one. It would walk alongside you. It would have the capabilities to do some other things. It was certainly very good at showing off and doing flips and the like. But at the end of the day, it wasn't something that I could actually use for showing off large language models. It was more for showing off just how, you know, futuristic and cool it is to have these things here. And I reckon I'd get pretty bored having it just run next to me for a while, although it looks like it's very, very good at doing that. So the Go 2 is not a go for me anyway. Super cheap compared to the H1, the human version of this. You'd pay about $1,600 USD plus 400 shipping, 2,000 USD. Plus duty, plus. Once it gets to you, sure, it might be 3,000, maybe 5,000 here in Australia, but that's negligible if you compare that to the humanoid pricing. All right, let's grab this question. Why are humans able to learn and contextualize so well on such little data? Well, you've reminded me there, Riggs, that I have a hidden slide that I had created and forgotten about. Here it is. AI guided by a century of human gifted research. So right now in these labs, you've got 100+ data scientists working on these models, and they brought in different fields. OpenAI even has a cultural expert there with one of my friends who translates science, communicates science. I think that's still his name, isn't it? Science communicator. Anyway, they brought on psychologists, they brought on economists, they've got people that test the models from an alignment perspective for all these different fields. What they should be leaning on is this 100 years of gifted research where we know that the gifted learner learns quickly, deeply, and broadly, has rapid processing, excellent memory, large vocabulary, and a high reasoning ability. That's everything to do with large language models there in blue. For humans as well, we also have original thought and expression. For gifted children, they have very much an intense desire to realize their potential. This is generalizing and obviously gets very easily squashed by schools. Highly developed curiosity, motivated to understand the world, increased adaptability and resourcefulness. And then I've added this orange one here, which is, again, traits and characteristics of giftedness. Loves daydreaming. Does that map to hallucinations of these models? Rare emotional depth and intensity, to an earlier point about GPT-4 going off the rails. Demonstrates leadership abilities. When we looked at giftedness in research in tribal areas here with our Indigenous Australians, I think it extended to what's going on there in the US as well. We found that giftedness maps to things like cooking, leadership, hunting. An advanced sense of humor. This was one that Professor Merica Gross talked a lot about, that the gifted child, the profoundly and exceptionally gifted child, would be the one in the class who would get the teacher's clever jokes that were meant to go over the heads of the entire classroom, but the very smart one would get it. And as a very general trait, gifted people have a strong sense of justice, ethics, and morality. This is across the board. I've seen a lot of this in the literature, but also through my 7 or 8 years of work with prodigies. They were all concerned with fairness, justice. They'd be the one to stand up to the bully or at least address it through a different means. So if our models get that as well from their pre-training, all of these Hollywood movies that have focused on competition, aggression, belligerence, and fear are a bit of a waste of time, because once you get up to a certain IQ, it becomes irrelevant. I can't think of any psychopathic or sociopathic high IQ individuals off the top of my head. I believe they all kind of ceiling out around 120, 130-ish, but I can't think of any 160 or 180 that's been up there. The Unabomber was high IQ. Let's duck into that for just a moment. Unabomber IQ. Oh, okay. I've just disproven myself already. So Ted Kaczynski had an IQ of 167. That would be an interesting little sideline. Did that come about from his genetics or his environment? I would be betting it came from the environment. Did I answer this question? Why are humans able to learn and contextualize so well on such little data? I love this question. It's probably got a very, 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 very long answer. And it comes back to the fact that these models train on a lot of data for a long time, just as we do something similar. If GPT-4 trained for 10,000 years, which is the estimate, the equivalent of 10,000 years, how many words was it speaking? How many connections was it making? Compare that to how many words a toddler hears before, say, the age of 5. How many words toddler hears before age 5? Not particularly helpful here. Using 1,000 words. I'm going to have a play around with this offline. I think my long and short answer today is that humans have more immersion than large language models, and we do pretty well. We're probably performing right now at 10% of the efficiency and power of a large language model. That's a pretty outrageous quote off the top of my head. But if you go and ask GPT-4 about a field that you know a lot about, and then a field you don't know anything about, you'll see that even in the field that you know a lot about, whatever your obsession is, astronomy, geology, specific kite surfing, it could be something to do with your collecting, it'll know more than you. And then obviously it'll know more than you in something you don't know anything about. That one's obvious. It's had longer to train. And the fact that we've had a very short time comparatively, no one here has had 10,000 years or even 100 years, comes down to the fact that humans have this immersion all the time and we're constantly learning. GPT-4 is frozen in time, whereas we've got our 20 or 30 or 40 years of playing around with data and communication and thought, which never stops. This is what we talk about, the 10,000 hours of immersion and learning for a particular subject, but then we've got far more than that, only measured in hours, not years, like GPT-4, that makes this really interesting. That's a really interesting question. I'm going to play around with that more, Riggs. Why are humans able to learn and contextualize so well on so little data? It's great. On Gemini, I didn't want to spend any time at all on Gemini, but keep this in mind. GPT-4 trained with 13 trillion tokens. And if you want to read more about that, you can have a look at LifeArchitect.ai/GPT-4, where we've documented as much as we know, which is not as much as we should know. OpenAI and nearly all the labs chose to not release any detail on the architecture. But through leaks, and you'd imagine there's leaks with a few hundred people playing around with this, we know that it trained on 13 trillion tokens. Gemini is going to be much different to a large language model. It's going to be a large language model combined with a visual language model, combined with an action model. And Hassabis has said very clearly that it's also going to be bringing in these specific systems on top. AlphaGo, AlphaZero, AlphaFold. And when we combine the strengths of those systems with LLMs, we get some pretty incredible stuff. And he said, today's chatbots will look trivial in comparison to what's coming in the next few years. That's not a particularly brave statement. Anyway, my point here is that Gemini is actually going to hit, they say, 65 trillion tokens. Now, given that my maths are not great, that's 5 times more tokens than GPT-4. 500% bigger. Now, if GPT-4 is 1.76 trillion parameters, it might be that Gemini hits 8 trillion, and we actually documented that in the most recent version of the memo. This, at the moment, we're just talking about text tokens. This is just referring to text tokens, but this was trained on YouTube videos, and it's going to be doing movement, and it's going to be doing these very specialized things that the Alpha series can do. Don't even know how we got there, just wanted to mention it. Training efficiencies, absolutely. Everyone is quantizing these models so that they can compress them down onto 1 GPU or less. Efficiencies like retrieval augmented generation, RAG, where it can go and reach out to news or just other documents that are real time is going to be very useful. The OpenAI team via Greg Brockman have talked about some other efficiencies and optimizations that they've been playing with. Pierre, it's a great question. We've talked a little bit about the very rapid pace of development with 4,000 papers on AI each month. Could AI be used to, let's say, condense the main points? Yes, it absolutely can. And this is going to have to be part of how we digest some of the data that's going to be pushed out with this exponential growth in AI. Just about to wrap up. Timothy, this one has been heavily documented, really worth having a look at. Do you know of any measures out there to tax companies for AI and robotics usage, replacing workers to help fund universal income? Sam wrote a fantastic essay called Moore's Law for Everything. I've talked about it quite a lot. Back in 2021, he was documenting this, so just around the time that Lita AI was born, actually, a few weeks before she was born. But he basically says, let's tax land and value of market cap for each company he's just given a nominal figure here in the air for how we would fund UBI. Very much worth reading this entire essay because in some ways this is documenting what's coming over the next few years. This guy, as the CEO of OpenAI, I say is the most powerful person in the world right now. More powerful than the President of the United States. In fact, the President of the United States comes to him to learn more about everything from the economy to productivity to technology, obviously. And a lot of what he comes up with becomes real life. You will have seen his eyeball scanners, his retina scanners for WorldCoin, and then we talked about how he has sponsored the big Neo robot by 1X. All right, that was really fun. I'm going to play around more with this concept of superintelligence because I do want to get it into people's minds in plain English that this stuff is here and it's not really what we expected. You know, it's a lot more powerful than a lot of people expect. I just want to find you one quick article here, and I put this in the description if you'd like to read it yourself. But it's very much worth reading. We talked about Terry Tao a moment ago. He was born here in Australia, in Adelaide, and he went to Flinders University. I think it was at about 9 years old. He became a professor at 22. He's still a professor there. He won the Fields Medal, or was awarded the Fields Medal in maths, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize, but for numbers. And he's saying some really, really, really interesting things about what GPT-4 can do. Well, let's see if we can find this here. 2026 level AI will be a trustworthy co-author in mathematical research and in many other fields as well. He said something even more interesting, but I'll leave this for you to read. It's in the description of this video. He's basically saying that he uses it in different ways, and we've got examples of that in the memo from his conversations in social media, and even screenshots of exactly how he's using it. But keep in mind, this is the smartest living person with a ratio IQ of 220 saying that he relies on this pre-superintelligence in GPT-4. The model is absurd. I think we've got the bubbles here. It's so much bigger than anything else. ChatGPT is not even on here because we don't know how big it is, but it's somewhere, ChatGPT might be somewhere around the size of Llama 2. GPT-4 is about 10 or 20 times bigger and more powerful than any other model. So if you're looking to play around with a model, that's the one I use as my daily driver. Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for joining me for our live stream with our upgraded camera and backdrop. Thanks to Harvey for the inspiration. And I'll be back before the scheduled Gemini live stream, which we scheduled for the 1st of November of this year, which is only 8 weeks away. I'll be back soon to talk about whatever is interesting to me. Thanks for joining me.
Did you see the memo about this?
Yeah, I have the memo right here.
Superintelligence is unfolding at lightning pace. Read my industry-grade analysis of AI that matters as it happens in plain English, the memo.
Yeah. Did you get that memo?
Yeah, I got the memo.
Get the inside look as AI models are embodied into humanoids, AI's IQ increases to nearly perfect, and bleeding-edge use cases expand to the entire world.
Yeah. Didn't you get that memo?
Editions are sent to subscribers at Fortune 500s, major governments, and people like you. LifeArchitect.ai/memo.
I have the memo.